In the most forgotten corner of a base, a silent sentry stood. No one even knew his name. But one day, one of the nation's youngest generals discovered the secret of his own life with a single symbol on that old man's arm. Every military base has its own rhythm, its own hierarchy, its own unseen heroes. But at the south gate of Fort Bragg, one of the largest military installations in the U.S., a figure stood guard for years, as unchanging as the base itself. Sergeant Miller. That was his name, or at least, that's what everyone knew him by. Whether the sergeant rank was a courtesy title for a retired soldier, or if he genuinely once held that rank, nobody seemed to know. He wore a faded, worn security uniform, taking his post in the guard shack long before the sun kissed the horizon each morning. His face, weathered by years of sun and wind, bore a tired yet vigilant expression, his eyes often gazing into the distance. Young soldiers, fresh out of basic training, saw him simply as a gate guard, a figure who saluted as cars passed, checked IDs, and occasionally offered a brief comment about the weather. Whispers circulated about him. Was he in Korea? Lagos? Vietnam? He never talks. But these whispers would invariably get lost in the daily din of the base. He was just the sergeant at the gate, a routine, a familiar part of the landscape. Fort Bragg's south gate was a constant flow of activity, day and night. Armored vehicles, civilian cars, buses, all passed before Sergeant Miller. He would observe each vehicle with the same solemnity, scrutinizing every ID with the same unwavering attention. His movements were slow, measured, yet never hesitant. With years of experience, he etched every face, every license plate, every minute detail into his memory, not like a robot, but like a meticulous observer. That morning, however, was different. Brigadier General Mark Evans, one of the base's newest and brightest stars, was passing through the gate. Though only in his early 40s, he had risen rapidly through the ranks due to his exceptional achievements in Afghanistan and Iraq. Known for his sharp intellect and charisma, he was a Green Beret veteran himself and renowned for his almost obsessive attention to detail. As General Evans' staff car approached the gate, Sergeant Miller rendered his usual salute. The general returned it, but his gaze lingered on the guard for a moment longer than usual. What caught his eye was a tattoo-like mark, subtly visible beneath the sleeve of Sergeant Miller's worn uniform. The tattoo was faded by time, almost a part of the skin itself. But General Evans froze. The silence inside the car seemed to drown out the noise of the base outside. His mind, trained to spot the smallest anomalies, even in the most chaotic battlefields, instantly recognized the symbol. He had seen it before, in old dusty file, in legends whispered in hushed tones. This wasn't just a tattoo, it was the mark, a rare, almost mythical insignia, whose existence was barely acknowledged, even within the most clandestine and elite circles of the military. It was the emblem of a unit from the darkest days of the Vietnam War, known as the Shadow Hunters. Sergeant Miller, sensing the sudden rigidity in General Evans's gaze, slowly looked up. His eyes, despite their age, held a surprising depth and wisdom. He met the general's stare, not with curiosity, but with an almost imperceptible acceptance, as if he had always known this moment would eventually come. General Evans, for his part, did not speak. He simply stared at the tattoo, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. This was the insignia of the Shadow Hunters, a legendary reconnaissance and sabotage unit whose very existence was once denied. They operated deep behind enemy lines, leaving no trace, and often never returned. The tattoo on Sergeant Miller's arm was not merely a decorative image. It was a badge of honor, forged in the crucible of impossible missions and terrible sacrifices. It was tangible proof of survival, of superhuman resilience, and of quiet heroism. And there it was, on the arm of an ordinary guard who spent his days standing watch at a base gate. General Evans knew the stories. He had heard whispers of a legendary operative, codenamed Ghost Operator, an almost mythical figure who had rescued lost units in the impenetrable jungles of Laos and Cambodia, single-handedly infiltrated enemy positions, and saved countless lives. Official records often categorize such operations as unintended incidents, unregistered contacts, but within special operations, Ghost Operator was a legend. He lived in the hushed whispers of senior commandos, in the lessons passed down to the young. General Evans had always dismissed these tales as exaggerations, until now. Sergeant Miller, seeing the profound recognition in General Evans's eyes, gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was not an invitation to talk. It was an acknowledgement, a shared secret. a deep understanding between two men from different generations, bound not by rank or formal protocol, but by a common, unspoken code. The brotherhood of those who have seen the darkness and still found their way back to the light. A lump formed in General Evans' throat, a sudden tightness in his chest. This was not merely a discovery. It was a profound encounter with living history, a tangible flesh and blood link to the almost mythical figures he had only read about in declassified, heavily redacted files. And this link was directly related to his own past. The general din of the base seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the silent hum of shared understanding. General Evans wanted to ask 1,000 questions. What were his missions? How did he survive? What did it feel like to carry such a burden of silence? But he knew he couldn't. Not now. The code of the Shadow Hunters was precisely that. Silence. They operated in the shadows, and they lived in them. Sergeant Miller returned to his duty, his movements flowing with the same quiet grace. But now, every salute, every ID check seemed imbued with a new, profound significance. General Evans watched him in his rearview mirror for a long moment, a deep respect settling over him. He realized that true valor often hides in plain sight, disguised as ordinary lives. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It simply is. Later that day, in the quiet solitude of his high-security digital archives, General Mark Evans found himself not attending to official duties, but engaged in a personal quest. He meticulously sifted through old files, cross-referencing encrypted code names and mission reports, searching for any flicker of a match for Ghost Operator and the Shadow Hunters insignia. Most of the documents were heavily censored, names redacted, missions obscured, but a few fragmented entries, almost accidental oversights, began to paint a picture. A logbook entry from a remote operational zone in Cambodia, dated 1972, a cryptic reference to a rescue operation deep behind enemy lines. A single line, almost an afterthought. Operative M-9, Ghost Operator, confirmed extraction of assets. Personally extracted commanding officer of wounded unit, Lieutenant Mark Evans. Refused medical evac despite severe injuries. And then, appended to a casualty report, a tiny, almost illegible note. M9, status silent. Not dead, not missing, just silent. This was no standard military designation. It was the protocol for agents who simply disappeared from the official record, living out their lives in anonymity, their service a secret known only to a select few who truly understood. Sergeant Miller was M9, the Ghost Operator, and he was the man who had saved General Evans' life. General Evans returned to the base gate the next morning. Sergeant Miller was there, as usual, bathed in the gentle glow of the rising sun amidst the morning mist. General Evans walked directly to him, not with the authority of a general, but with the profound gratitude of a man approaching his savior. He didn't speak. He simply stood beside Sergeant Miller, watching him perform his duty until Sergeant Miller looked up, his eyes holding that familiar, wise glint. General Evans extended his hand. In his palm rested a challenge coin, not one he'd been given, but one he'd had specially commissioned the night before, based on the historical sketches of the Shadow Hunters insignia he'd found. It was a simple, rough-hewn coin, deliberately aged to appear old. It bore a stylized shadow figure and the inscription, Unforgotten. Sergeant Miller's eyes widened, just a fraction. He looked at the coin, then at the general, a slow, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of his mouth. He took the coin, his gnarled fingers closing around it. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The coin was the answer. The silent handshake was the validation. From that day forward, a subtle shift was noticed at the base gate. General Evans would salute Sergeant Miller for longer, sometimes even stepping out of his vehicle for a few brief words. These words would be about the weather or how the shift was going. But in their eyes, there was a shared language, a mutual understanding that transcended words. The other guards and soldiers began to sense it too, the unspoken respect, quiet reverence. Sergeant Miller was still the sergeant at the gate, the silent sentry. But now, there was a new aura around him, an invisible mantle of honor that only a select few truly understood. Sergeant Miller continued his duty every day with the same precision, the same quiet dedication. He never boasted about his past, never recounted war stories, never asked for a thank you. He simply lived, carrying his history not as a burden, but as an intrinsic part of who he was. And in the quiet corners of Fort Bragg, South south gate. A legend, once forgotten, was finally remembered, not with fanfare, but with the silent, unwavering respect of those who knew what true courage looked like. Have you ever met someone like Sergeant Miller, a veteran who never boasted, never sought praise, but whose quiet presence spoke volumes? Share their story in the comments. Let us know their name, what they did, and where they are from. Because at Legacy Stories, we believe the most powerful stories don't shout, they wait. If this story touched you, subscribe, share, and help us keep these voices alive. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, remember, sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones you least expect, hiding in plain sight, carrying their legacy with silent dignity.